Welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's a lot of fun. Michael and I have been, we work for React training. Right now we're on a crazy spring tour. We're hitting up 10 cities in 5 weeks. So this is week 2 of our tour. If you want to catch us elsewhere, you know, come to Phoenix. This one could use some help in the sales department. I think we're at like 18 tickets for that one.
Everybody in Phoenix already knows React. They're good.
I guess.
They already rewrote all their apps with hooks and everything. It's good.
Yeah. Denver could also use a couple of, you know. So anyway, that's not why you're here. React hooks are awesome. Who's using them? Who's rewriting their code to use them? Did you just see today that Facebook announced a new UI? And Zuckerberg's up there and he's like, we rewrote the UI. Do you remember what Dan said at ReactConf? Dan said, don't rewrite your app in hooks. And then what did I say when I got up right after him?
I think you should.
I said, I think you should. And then what did Facebook do? So who are you going to listen to from now on? Dan or Ryan?
Probably Ryan.
Thank you. Hooks they're really exciting. They bring a level of composition that we haven't had in React. Well, we kind of did with mixins, but mixins kind of had some problems. And every now and then, people will be talking about hooks on Twitter or in an article or at a meetup, and there's this what's the word I'm looking for? I'm being recorded.
Asinine?
Hesitation. There's some hesitation to use hooks. Because you look at the old component, right? You look at a class component, and then someone rewrites it into hooks, and they say, look. And you're like, it's not that different. And it's super magic, right? It's a little bit surprising how it can even work. And you start wondering, like, so is React with like Babel, like doing weird stuff, like pretending like your JavaScript is a template and compiling it to something else? How does all this stuff work? So what we want to do tonight is, number one, we want to demystify hooks. If it feels like it's a little bit too much magic, or if maybe it's not too much magic, but it's always nice to not think your code is magic, right? When you quit thinking code is magic, you realize how it works, or you can figure out how it works, and that's always easier. Hey, hello? Oh man, just died. I guess go home. And it's easier to debug when you understand how something works. I can't tell you how many times we're sitting in a workshop and somebody is, they've got some sort of issue, they've got a bug or just red text in the console, and they just don't trust like JavaScript generally, right? I'm trying to add these two numbers and I'm getting this error, and we have a hard time reading the errors sometimes. Like the error tells you exactly what you need to do sometimes. But we don't trust JavaScript, and then we don't trust the browser, and then we don't trust Babel, and then we don't trust React. So let's go all the way up to the top and let's say, well, let's figure out if we can actually trust React first. And then later you can work on trusting the rest of the stack. But I want to start here with React and kind of demystify how these hooks work. So this is a React app and a React meetup, so naturally we made a counter, because that's what React is for. Oh. See if you click this when it's at 1. You can't. Okay. So this is a little bit better than the Redux counters that you've seen. Just a little bit. All right, so we said minutes, set minutes, useState 5. So I've got 5 minutes in there initially. Let's reload this and we'll see it. Then I've got error, and I've got set error. And I start with null. Then you can see here when we handle add, that's sitting on the button down here, the button that says FA plus on there. That's actually ARIA. Actually, we could do it right here. We need an ARIA label on here that says add. Why? because when we turn on our screen reader, we want it to read it. So anyway, that handle add is right there, and then we will say, if minutes are less than 9, we're going to go ahead and increment the minutes. Otherwise, we're going to set an error. You know, when I very first used hooks, it didn't even occur to me how strange this is, that I call useState on line 9, and it returns to me the minutes. And then I call useState on line 10, and it returns to me the error. Like, have you ever done something like add 2 and 3? And one time it gives you 5. The next time it's like, cow. I'm getting minutes, and then I'm getting error. I was just so excited about the composition that we get with React, or with hooks, that it didn't even occur to me to think about this, but that is weird. So we're gonna make our own version of React hooks to demystify how they work. And the reason being is that I like a lot of you raised your hands using hooks, and I'm feeling left out because I'm using enzyme. A few of you know what that joke is about. Cuts too deep. Or does it work now? Did they fix it? No, still doesn't work. Yeah, well, neither Dan nor I told you to use enzyme, so you should have listened to both of us. What's that? The docs did, that's right. So Dan did tell you to use enzyme for a little while. People are going to walk out of here. He's an arrogant jerk. I don't know why I'm feeling so cheeky today, though. Okay, so I'm using enzyme, so I can't use hooks yet. So I'm going to make my own version of React hooks. Yeah. Uh-oh, my linter's mad. We don't have a useState. Let's make our own useState. Oop. And let's check out the signature here. We pass in, what do we pass in? Our default value. And then we return this array. You computer nerds are like, it's a tuple. So we're going to make our tuple here. Sounds like a little kid like potty training. And then what else does our tuple return? Number 2. Anyway. So set minutes. So we're going to return a function that's like set value. So I'm going to need some sort of function here. Call it set value. And now we got our little tuple, and we can return it. Tuple. Is that a syntax error, or can we do that?
No, you can do it. It's fine.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh! Oh, man.
How do you think French people write their code?
In English. I just kind of want to bask in this for a minute. That really, okay. Well, let's
remember to use it everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, this is going into every documentation that I write from now on. I'm really happy about this. I was about to rename it to state, but I'm keeping it as tuple. To play. All right, so okay, my app didn't blow up. It doesn't work anymore, but it didn't blow up. It's one of those commits that's like refactored and cleaned up the code. We merged a pull request on our workshop material, thinking, oh, okay, cool, thanks, Sky. And then we showed up here this morning, and a bunch of things were broken. We're like, oh, crap. So anyway, review those pull requests a little bit better. All right, so cool. So when I click this when I click this button and I call handle add, it's calling set minutes right there. Boom, set minutes. It passes in a new value. So right here, the set value thing is going to get the new value. But I've got to come around somewhere and assign something, right? I've got to keep track of a value, and I've got to change it here. And then what else happens after you call a set value function? Yeah, React is going to re-render. Okay, so I need to assign something and then I need to re-render. Inside of this function, I mean, default value equals new value or something? That'll be, I don't know, does that, what the heck is that gonna do? We'd call useState on the first render, get 5, call it again. But that's just inside of this function closure, right? It has nothing to do with the next render or anything. And inside of these functions, these values, like JavaScript garbage collection it'll, as soon as this function is done, as soon as useState is done, and I didn't send this array off somewhere, and I didn't send this function off somewhere, it just garbage collects all of this stuff. It returns the thing, and it's like, okay, I'm done, I'm out of here. So if I'm assigning this, like, it has nothing to do with anything going on here. So I've got to keep track of this stuff somewhere else. So I'm going to make some tuples out here. Nah, we'll call them states. We'll have all of our states out here. And now I want to keep track of my tuple inside of that state. So I need to do something like, when I get one of these things, I need to push it into there. Oh man, and the autocomplete even works. I'm learning so much tonight. So I'm going to push that thing in there, and then when we reassign something, so now I know how to assign something. I can be like, okay, states. Oh, I got to somehow find it. So I need some sort of like ID or something, right? I stored it after the first render. We're going to come around and re-render. So I've got to. And when we try to assign it, I've got to go find it. So I need an ID. So I'm going to say, let's call this a call ID. And let's keep track of how many calls we have done to useState. I'm going to say plus call ID, or calls. So the plus in front says to increment it, just like on the back end. But if you do it on the front end, then it also returns the value. So we're going to get a call ID. And down here, instead of just pushing, we're going to make an assignment that way. And so now I can find it when we click the button. And then the first item in that array is my actual value, and then I can assign it to my new value. You with me so far? Click the button, go find the thing, assign the value. Now I got to re-render this. Render with crappy hooks. Let's make that work. So here's our function. Render with crappy hooks. Actually, you know what? Let's get all of our hook code all the way down there. Okay. Oh, I need to call this right away too, initially. Okay, so our first render comes around, and we increment call ID to 0. And then we create our little tuple, and then we assign it into the array. So now we've got this thing inside of here like that, right? We've got our first one. So right here we call useState with 5. So we're going to have this array where this is going to say 5, and then this is going to be a function. Right, because we made that assignment right here, and then we threw it into the arrays, into the states. And then we come around and we do this one with the error. And so we're going to increment calls from -1, from 0, because that's where we're at now, and we're going to go to 1. And so then we're going to have something like this inside of there. Looking good? All right. Let's see how we're doing. And let's, every time we use state, let's console log. Actually, you know what? Down here in our render with crappy hooks, let's console log all of our states. Did you see that error? Do not use marquee elements as they can create visual accessibility issues and are deprecated. Come on.
Elements. They should have called it no awesome elements.
If I'm using a marquee, I'm well aware of what's going on here. Okay. So I click plus. Why did I not get that in the first place? Seems like I should have, right?
Called it immediately.
Oh. Let's click the button anyway.
I think it's above the. Is it above that deprecation?
Oh, yes it is. Thanks. Boop. So there it is. It's empty. And now when we click plus, whoosh, let's go and look at the code. Let's think about what happened. The first render came around. We assigned our two tuples into here. So we should have 1 and 2, our minutes and our error. And then we clicked the plus button. So we called set value. So we should have updated our 5 to a 6. And then we re-render with these things. So if I open it up, here's what it looked like. Oh, what do we have going on here? We got a whole bunch of stuff, right? We've got way too many of those. Way too many of those. We've got 4 of them. Why do we have 4 of these? We rendered twice. We called useState how many times? Called it twice per render. First render comes around, and we assign, you know what, maybe console logging our states right here would be better. That would definitely be better. Let's visualize it right there. Okay, so the first time we render, we made those assignments. At 0, we put a 5 and then the set function, and then at 1, we put null. So that's our minutes, that's our error. I click the button, doink, and now we've got 4. So what's going on? Call ID is getting incremented still, right? So it was 0, and then it went to 1, then it went to 2, and then we re-rendered and went to 3 and 4. So we need to reset it when we render with our crappy hooks. Oh man. Calls equals -1. Come in here, we find it, we re-render. So we're still creating, we're just making brand new ones every time. So if we come around on the second render, we should say, hey, wait a sec. If we already established this state, let's just return it. So our first render, we bring in the default value, we create the set value function, and then we store it into states. Our second render, we come around and we say, hey, we're already tracking this state, so we don't need to create a brand new one. We can just return the one that's already sitting there. So we've already got it right here, right? There they are. So we just need to return the one that's sitting there for us. All right, let's save this. Crappy hooks. Does this help? What was that?
I was just going to say now you can still use Enzyme.
Yeah, so now I can still use Enzyme. So that's all it is. That's all that's going on. I mean, of course, there is 10 times, 100 times probably this amount of code to really make it work, because as components mount and unmount, you actually need to keep track of the call count per component. Right? It's not just this global thing. If a component comes in and uses state and then goes out, that's another thing. We're never actually cleaning up. Like, we're assigning into this cache of states, but we're never removing it because we don't have knowledge of React's rendering and knowing that it's mounting or unmounting components and knowing to expire those caches. So we can't actually make like usable hooks this way. But as a mental model, this is exactly how it works. That's why we have a couple of those rules of hooks where you can't do things like Well, if the minutes are less than 10, then let's use a state here, right? We're gonna get an error in this case. Sorry, not a real error, but we're gonna get a ESLint error that says, hey, useState is called conditionally. React hooks must be called in the exact same order in every component render. Exact same. Those words mean the exact same thing as each other. So that's why we've got to keep. That's why we've got to keep that stuff unconditionally rendered, because React is tracking them by the call count inside of your component. So if you've ever wondered, like, oh, why'd they make me do that? That's it. They track it by when it was called. Did I miss anything?
It's a good presentation.
Thanks.
I think we can all go home.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael. It's awesome to be back. I love coming back to Boston. Beautiful place. Happy to be here. So Ryan talked a few times about, he mentioned the word composability, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what that means. Because honestly, it's a word that I really didn't even get until like very recently myself. And it's a word that I hear all the time in conversation with other developers, and sometimes I'm like having a conversation with somebody and they're using the word and I'm using the word, and I'm like, I don't think we have the same definition of this word, right? So I wanted to kind of see if we could at least just here in this room, if we could kind of agree on what that means, and kind of show how it works in React with these hooks, because I think it's their number one feature. Honestly, when Dan first showed me hooks, he wanted to get like some early feedback on hooks. And so I was looking at it and I was like, this is kind of cool, you know, this is kind of interesting. And then he showed me how hooks compose, and then I was like, ding! That's when the light really went up. That's when I got really, really excited about it. So Ryan's been showing us the useState hook, right? We went deep behind the scenes. We recreated that one from scratch. I'm going to talk about another hook called useEffect. Okay. So let's say I want to kind of go behind the scenes a little bit and think about what do we use effect for? What are the side effects that we're having in our app? Okay. So I'm actually going to look at this little message counter right here. Okay, this thing right here, this 20 out of 200. Sorry, did that scare some people? All right, we're good. All right. And the thing about that is that number kind of stays in sync with, you know, the length of the message that I type here. Okay. And you know, React does that for us, right? So here's the component that I'm rendering this form here. And you'll see that here on this text area, I've got an onChange handler. Okay, and as the text changes, I'm just setting the message, and then I'm going and putting the message length inside this span right here, right? And we kind of take for granted that we code like this, and then React makes the stuff happen in the page, right? Let's say, for example, that we wanted to try and implement this manually. Okay, so we just have a span here, and it's not really doing anything for us right now. Right? It doesn't have any text in it at all. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and keep that span up to date as the message changes. Okay? And so what I'm going to say is, first of all, I'm going to need a ref to it. Right? Let's have the message length ref. So there's another hook called useRef conveniently. Let's get a message length ref. The word ref comes from, we want to get a reference to something, probably a DOM element. Okay, so most of the time, most of your refs are references to actual DOM nodes, right? These aren't actual DOM nodes; these are just descriptions of what we want in the DOM. And then, as soon as React creates them, if we give it a ref, then it'll give us a reference to that DOM node, right? So we have an object reference. So now, what I could say is, look, I could say every time the message changes, That's one time when I know that we're going to need to update that count, right? So I can just go to that, node. Here it is, message length ref dot current. Okay? And I could say your text content is going to be the length of the message. So event.target.value.length. Okay? So I'm just trying to identify all the places where the number needs to change and then doing it myself manually. Okay? So we can see we've got one. So as I'm handling these change events, check it out. Right? Nice. Who needs React? Right? Like we could do all of the manipulations that we need on the document. We could just do them ourselves, right? We could just do them imperatively ourselves. Why do we need React? This is how we used to think about writing apps before React. And if you haven't done any React, this might still be how you think about writing apps. And you're like, wow, what other way is there to write an app, right? When the keyboard event comes in, the message length changes, go and update the number, right? Like, what other way is there to think about this problem? So you might notice that I've actually got like a little drop-down menu up here. And let's say I'm going to, wow, I do a lot of weightlifting apparently. Let's say I'm just going to plug this one in. People are like, I can't tell. Yeah, I know, they're small weights. I try. Anyway, let's talk about
You're wearing
something
black,
else.
it's hard to tell.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Yeah, maybe I should, no, never mind. Okay, so you'll notice as I'm selecting different things, decided to swim out to Ellis Island. You'll notice as I'm selecting different things here, the count isn't changing. Right? The only event that we're listening for right now is change events in the text area, right? But that's not the only time the message changes, right? The message changes when you select something from the dropdown as well. Maybe we could handle that event as well. Let's see. Let's go down here. Okay, so in here I've got a drop. You know, on the dropdown. Here's where I'm going to set the message. So maybe I could manually do the work here as well. So what was it? Basically, I'm just going to go and copy all that code, yank that, and put it there. Okay. Except this time it's not event.target.value, it is message. Okay. All right, so now selecting from here works. That's good. Selecting from the drop-down works. That's good. That's right. I think we're good. Except for that initial page load. Oh, well, we can ignore that. As soon as they start typing, they'll be fine, right? So when we're thinking in events, this is kind of what we have to do. We have to think about, okay, what are all of the times when this thing changes? And when it does change, that's when we need to go and execute the change, right? Ourselves. That's when we need to update the document, okay? What if instead of thinking in events, we thought about in terms of state, right? React gives us this cool little hook called useEffect. And if you've done any React at all, you'll be used to thinking in terms of state, but you might not have used the useEffect hook before. And so all I'm going to do now is useEffect is short for side effect. If you're a functional programmer, right? The side effects are the things that you do that are other than the things that the main program is doing. Okay? So if a pure function is adding two numbers, the side effect would be, you know, printing it to the console or something like that, right? So in this case, React is actually perfectly able to. Well, let's just move our side effect into here. Let's just move it into here. So I'm going to remove it from here. I'm going to remove it from both areas. Ooh, do I need to import useEffect? Did I not use it before? Oh, jeez. And input message. All right. So what I'm going to say is, whenever my message changes, go and update the length. Oh, one thing we notice right off the bat is it's already here, right? So in this case, we're saying we want to have a side effect. whenever the message changes, I want you to run this side effect. Okay? You'll notice that it's working even without the message there. Okay, so the default behavior of useEffect is always run. Always run. On every render, run the side effect. You can think about it as kind of like a synchronizer, right? It's saying let's synchronize something to the document. Okay. In this case, though, we don't need it, right? Like we just went through that big exercise when all we really needed was message.length here. So then, what kind of stuff is it good for? You know, what kind of stuff do we do here? So if you think about it, these are actually the kinds of side effects that you're having all the time in your app. Things like logging, things like fetching data, things like timers, timeouts and intervals. Any other sorts of imperative work. You could say like syncing your, D3 charts, right? This is other stuff that's going on, okay? Other sorts of imperative work that's going on in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up really quickly. I'm going to pull up another example. I'm going to boot this one. Give me just a sec. Start number 5. So I'm just kind of cherry picking from some of the material that we've got here. Okay. So let's look at this component real quick. So this component is responsible for rendering a user avatar component. Okay. So I've got a user avatar in one place. I've got it here. Okay. So instead of using it for synchronizing to the DOM, let's use it to go and get some data. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep both of these things here in data. Okay. And we need these two things in order to actually render our document here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's have a side effect. Let's use an effect here. I'm going to say, look, whenever the user ID changes, that's when we actually need to go and do a fetch. So I've got a function here called fetch user. So I'm going to take this one here and say fetch the user with the UID. Then when you get the user object back, set the user. Okay? Right? So basically what this is saying is on the initial render and anytime the user ID changes, go and fetch the user with that user ID and set it in state. Right? So that we have that user object. And now the user avatar actually pops in. Okay? Do you remember how we used to do this? Or how many of us are probably still doing it in our apps? How would you have a component that fetches data and then shares that data with you? Yeah, you could use the lifecycle methods, right? There are a couple of popular methods for doing this. Maybe we have like a user class here or something, right? And I'm going to just extend my React component. So I would have some state, right? And in my lifecycle method, in my component did mount, I would say something like this.fetch, right? And this is going to kick off the first fetch. So let's have a fetch method up here. And let's say fetch user with this.props.user UID. Let's have a UID prop, okay? And then we'll get a user back, and then we can this.set state with the user, okay? So now that our user component has like the ability to actually go out and do the fetch, how is it going to share that information? How can we render with that data down here? Any ideas for how we could share that state? There are two patterns. There's a higher order component pattern, or the one that I kind of prefer to use is a render prop. Okay? So what if we had a function, redner, even. What if we had a function called render down here, and what I could do is I could use a render prop called, we'll just call it children. won't pass this .state.user. Okay? Okay, so what am I doing here? All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to duplicate the functionality that we had with the hook. Okay? That's all I'm trying to do. Okay? So I'm going to comment this one out. Just to sort of, compare with current patterns, right? So let's say that instead of having the state here, we'll say we're going to render a user. Now, where do we actually go and we render this thing? So let's say here that we're going to render a user with the UID equals the UID that we got. Oops, sorry. And then out comes the user. And we can render something with it. This makes sense? How many people have seen this pattern before? The render prop pattern before? Okay, if you've read the React docs, you probably read about this pattern, right? It's an Apollo GraphQL. Anybody use Apollo? It has a query component that kind of works like this, right? You plug in your query, it goes and fetches some data, gives you the data in a render prop, right? So you can render something with it. Let's see if this works. Where's the user thing being used? This thing is being used. So it's here, and it's here, and it's here. So actually what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take a bunch of this code, probably all of this code, and just like move it in. Okay? So all of our rendering logic now belongs, and we're going to return this. Okay. Whew. Well, a lot of stuff that just moved around, but hey, whew, we had our user, right? So this is a component that does more or less the same thing as what this effect did. We had to kind of move some things around, right? Where did we have to move things? Well, since we didn't know the user until we got the user ID out in the render prop, we had to move all that logic down into that render function, right? Which wasn't a big deal, it was just a copy and paste. But now we've got a bunch of lifecycle code. Let me ask you, is this component here, is this resilient to the UID changing? What if it gets a new UID prop? What does it have to do? Update, right? So let's add some more code. Let's say component did update prev props. And what we'll say is, you're familiar with this dance. If this.props.uid does not equal the prev props.uid, spin your partner round and round. This.fetch, right? You all know that pattern, okay? All right, so we made it a little more resilient now. What happens if we're mid-flight and the fetch comes back? So what happens if I'm like going very quickly between these two things? Memory leak, right? Because this is an asynchronous operation, right? Here's the start, and here's the end. And in between this time, there was an unmount, right? And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to set state on a component that's gone. And so React says, hey, you can't set state on an unmounted component, right? So we need some sort of way to like cancel this behavior. I don't know, maybe we could say something like this dot is mounted, something like that. How about that? How about let's say in component will unmount. Anybody used something like this before? Yeah, I know you have. It's fine, I used it too. This unmounted equals false, right? And so what we want, actually, let's say the opposite. This is unmounted equals true. And then we can say if bang this dot is unmounted. Boolean logic is not my strong suit. Is that correct? Okay. So the only time we set this true is when we're about to unmount. If we're not unmounted, which means we are mounted, then we're going to set the user when we get back. Okay. I think this is safe now. I think this is safe.
What if your UID changes mid-flight?
Oh, jeez. Come on, man. wasn't going to go that deep. All right.
Keep going.
If your UID changes when you're in the middle of this, yeah, then you're going to have to like basically keep a map of user IDs that you're currently fetching and be like, is the new one in the currently fetching map? No? Yes? I don't know. Right? How would you fix it?
I'd use a hook.
You'd use a hook. Good answer. All right, so how many lines are we in here? Here, I'm gonna do a little analysis here. So we've got 11 through 32, so about 21 lines of code, right? All right. So this is how a lot of us are still kind of fetching data in our apps, right? And you'll notice there are a lot of the same patterns that are going on here, okay? A lot of the same stuff. This is your setup, right? That's the thing that you run when the first time it mounts. And then there's always this part where you have to kind of watch for data that's changing over time, right? And then there's always the cleanup, right? There's always the part where you clean up, and then there's the part where you actually render with the stuff that you've got, right? With the actual data that you've got, okay? Oh, and then there's also another part where you actually keep the state. And then you want to make sure that you're cleaning up as you go, right? As the user ID changes, okay? So somewhere in Apollo is code like this, or somewhere in your app, if you're not using it, is code that looks something like this if you're doing data fetching inside your components, okay? So let's go back. Let's go back. So I want you to consider this example with me, okay? Oh geez, now I gotta take all this stuff and put it back up top. Bear with me. Gonna have probably an easier time refactoring this if I would have like put it in a function at the beginning. All right, and then we're gonna return that and that. All right. So hang on. You mean this does the same thing as what was going on up here? Right? We're actually cheating a little bit. We're not doing the exact same thing. We're not handling the case where you're in the middle of a fetch and then they change the user ID on you. Okay? So let's handle that one. I'll say let current equal true. And then in my cleanup function, so this is the third part of the useEffect API. The first part is the setup function, right? The effect itself. The third part, or the second part is the dependency array. The third part is the cleanup function. So in our cleanup function, we're just going to say current equals false. And then we'll only do this work if that flag is still true. Okay? Okay, so now this hook is feature complete with that component that we have. Okay? Do you see how they identified a lot of the common pieces that you have in your data fetching components? And they kind of distilled it down? They're like, oh yeah, the setup. Right? That's all of this stuff, right? The cleanup is this function here, right? The diffing. Now think about what happens if the user ID changes in this case, okay? If the user ID changes, we're going to plug a new user ID into the useEffect dependency array, which signals to React, hey, it's time to rerun that effect again. Clean up from the last one, and rerun the effect for that new user. So that question that Ryan asked me about, like, what if the user ID changes mid-flight, right? So what if you've got one user ID here, and then by the time you get down here, the UID changed? Do we have that problem here? Do we have the concurrency issue here? Because no, we don't. Because every time we run this side effect, we clean up from the previous time. Okay? It's a nice model. Okay, let me do one really quick for these posts, and then I'm going to try and be done by like 5 after. Okay, so we'll have another effect to fetch these posts. So this one up here is a pretty simple, like a straightforward like fetch, right? Go to the server, fetch something, get it back, store it in state, right? There are other types of data descriptions that are more like data fetches that are more like a subscription, right? Where the data is like streaming in over a WebSocket or something. Maybe you're building your app on Firebase or whatever. Okay, so we can do something like, let's subscribe to the posts for this user ID. And this API works like this. So I've got a function called subscribe to posts. I plug in a user ID. I give it a callback whenever this user gets new posts that callback's going to fire, right? So in here we can set the posts like this. I'm going to say this one is also dependent on that user ID. So as that user ID changes, I want to get the posts, get the new posts in. And the posts in this example is what generates the rings around my mug. So, so in this case, get the posts, set them when I get back. This actually returns a cleanup function. So, so the thing that I return from subscribe to posts, when I call that function, it makes sure that the subscription is no longer called, right? So if I return that from my side effect, React knows how to clean up the last subscription, right? So I want you to just think about all the things that are going here. We have state initialization. We have cleanup. And then we have when the UID changes, we have two things going on, right? There's cleanup the last subscription and re-initialize the post state. Okay? All of that stuff is going on in these couple of lines here, right? Cool thing about these arrow functions is we can actually make this a lot shorter. Ooh, can you get it shorter than that? What about this? Posts, set posts. All we really need there is a set posts. What about this return thing? Okay, hold on. What's going on in that one line of code? I'm doing state initialization, right? I'm doing cleanup of the last subscription, and when the user ID changes, I'm watching for that, and I'm cleaning up the last one, and I'm reinitializing the state, right? Resetting up the subscription. That is a lot of stuff for one line of code, right? It's basically all of this stuff, right? This is the oh, check when the user ID changes and then reset up the subscription, right? Actually, I should have something like, you know, this dot tear down and here, right? So, but you can imagine the exact same component setting up a subscription would actually be a little bit longer than that, right? So what is the advantage of hooks? Is it, oh, my code is going to be so short, it's going to be like, cool, really cool? Well, I mean, that's why not? I think that's cool, personally. But that wasn't the thing that really sold me on it. You know what was the thing that really sold me on it? I mean, this is a good selling point. Like, I could stop here and I'd be happy with my hook doing all of that stuff. The part where I was like, ooh, was when I realized that because you can just call these functions in order, right? Just like Ryan was saying, like, React is just tracking the order of the functions as they're called. Does it matter if I call that function here on line 37, or if I have another function that says that does that work up here, and I call it right here, right? Like all I did was take this line of code that was sitting right there, and I put it inside a function, and I called that function instead, right? We're kind of getting at something here, right? This is the ability that you have to refactor functions, right? If you have a big old swath of code sitting somewhere and you don't particularly like it, maybe your function is too long, right? You can just take a chunk of it and you can put it in another function and call that function, right? And it would be the, yeah, mind-blowing, right? All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say const user is use user of UI. Ah, jeez. Sorry. Oh, jeez. Every once in a while, I'm like using Vim, and I'm, oh, I have such superpowers. And then I'm like, oh, I'm an idiot. Never. All right. So I'm going to copy this code up here. I'm going to copy this side effect, and the only thing I'm going to return is the user. I'm going to call this use user. Pass in the use user. User. See that? All right, use user with the UID. Okay, what's going on here? Why is this so exciting? I just took a bunch of code out of here, right? It was down here, and I said, no, I'd rather put it up here, right? What does that let me do? Reuse it, right? I'm going to stick this in a file called user.js, and now anybody else on my team can use that, right? And they can compose that in to their function, right? All they have to do is come in here and call it. Check it out, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's take it out here. Function use posts. Pass in the user ID. Let's return the posts. Const posts is use posts of the UID. Okay, like, what is even going on here? Right? We took all of that code and we just boiled it down to 2 lines. How were we able to do it with 2 lines? It's because of the way that functions compose, right? You do this all day. You pull apart functions, you give them arguments, you pull them into smaller functions, right? What if we wanted a one-liner? User and the posts. User and posts. Gee, I wonder how I would do that.
Gotta spell it right.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first, if you are worthy. That's the first challenge, right? Now some of you might be like, okay, well, like that's just an ugly function. But I don't care what you think, because honestly, you can write your own one, and it's not that hard, right? Like you can write your own function to do this, right? We just composed 2 hooks together, and everything that those hooks entail. Don't make me rattle off the list again of all the stuff that they're doing behind the scenes. You know all the stuff they're doing, right? Setup, cleanup, reinitialization when it changes, right? And cleanup when the thing unmounts, right? And we can take all of that behavior and wrap it up in a function and say, here, you want the user and his posts? Just plug in a user ID. You're going to get all of that behavior for free. Right? You can wrap up authentication into one little function, right? Imagine what you could do with this. You could be like, imagine if you had a function called useOff. You could just drop that in any component in your app, anywhere you go, and you'll automatically know the current user. That would be pretty cool, right? You don't have to pass it down as a prop everywhere, right? What if you had something like oh, look at this. Use my data, right? And here you could have your map state to props, right? Right? And here you would just return the pieces of the props that you need. Okay? If we're staying true to the Redux example, we would just return our Did I miss a? Oh! Sometimes I forget. I get a little bit excited. And I use both return statements and object literals. Right? Okay, so the use data thing isn't working yet, but you get what I'm saying, right? You can have any of these little one-liners, and what is that wrapping up? It's wrapping up all kinds of stuff. Okay, it's wrapping up all kinds of stuff. So when I say composability, this is what I'm talking about. Okay? These hooks are a composable primitive. You can wrap up Lifecycle, you can wrap up state management, you can wrap up multiple pieces of state management and Lifecycle, all in the exact same hook, cart it around, put it anywhere you want in your app. And that's why I'm so excited about hooks. So thank you for giving us some time to talk to you tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. We have time for a couple of questions. Ryan, get back up here. Let's see if you have a couple of questions we'd be happy to take. Yeah?
So how do you solve the enzyme problem?
So how do you solve the enzyme problem?
Enzyme.
Yeah, in that case, you're just going to have to wait for them to support it, right? Either that or you can use Ryan's crappy hooks. Yeah, it's
We need a better question than that.
yeah. Yeah.
One thing that's nice with the container pattern in Redux is you sort of break down components out and
Yeah.
containers. A lot of the examples I've seen online of people using hooks that sort of like destroys that idea. Okay, can you speak on that?
Yeah, it was, I mean,
So Dan has said that people have taken that way too seriously. It's a thing that happens, it's not like a goal.
it almost happens because you're using Redux. When you think about it, right? Because you want to connect that one, and you don't want to have to connect them all over the place. So you want to just kind of connect this one, and have it have all the data, and then it will pass props to the other ones, and then they will be pure, and you can take advantage of pure component, right? So it almost happens as a side effect of the way of the choice that you made to use Redux.
Also, another way to think about this is your smart component is now a hook. Right? That thing fetches the data.
The user component, the thing that's responsible for fetching data, it's just a hook.
Yeah, so that's your split now.
Yeah.
So in terms of unit testing,
Unit testing?
yeah,
How do you test a hook?
yes, I did. So I was having trouble, we're using enzyme and we usually
All right, no more
No. It's okay that you're using it. Okay, we're okay with that. We're cool with that.
What do you suggest, like, which library to?
Yeah, right.
I mean, Michael and I have never used the testing library. We've always just used React DOM render.
I'm going to show you something.
Works
I'm
great.
going to show you the React router tests.
While he's looking that up, there's a question about just testing, unit testing hooks generally that people have, because you can't use a hook outside of a component. You really just need to make a component right there in the test, right? Just make a quick function, use the hook inside of it, and then do your normal assertions inside of there. Just don't overthink it.
So we've used Jest, but Jest is more like a
Runner.
test runner, right? I use Jest, and then Jest has the expect library that's sort of bundled with it. So this is really all you need to do when you want to test something, is you just render your component. I've made a helper called render strict that automatically wraps it in a strict mode, so we're sure that all of our stuff is strict mode compliant. But that's all it does. Render your component and then go ahead and make your assertions, right? So I personally never understood why people bring in enzyme. I guess it's because of the selector thing where you can select like deeply nested elements. Yeah.
As you can see, testing's not our favorite topic.
Yeah.
So you talked about needing to call these hooks in the exact same order every time.
Yeah.
When you began composing them, I imagine that leads to some sort of naming convention so that you know that these are the special functions that
Yeah.
have to be,
You have to name them use something.
always have to use.
Yeah, every time. Yeah, in fact, React will get mad at you if you don't.
No kidding.
Yeah, no, it's kind of weird, but yeah, they do. They'll get mad at you. They'll be like,
Did we see the lint warnings on any of your stuff?
no, no, we didn't.
So the React team has actually created an ESLint rule. So like we've all adopted a whole bunch of ESLint configs that are actually a waste of everybody's time. So hopefully, this one that is a great tool, we'll all adopt it. So there's two of them. There's one called, I am way too salty tonight. Anyway,
Because you're in Boston, dude.
yeah, I've lived here for a couple of years and I love it here. Yeah, that's part of it. Anyway, one of them's called rules of hooks. So if you put a hook inside of an if statement, it's going to be like, hey, don't do that. And you've got to name it use.
So if I call this one like,
Just put it behind an if.
whatever, RM posts, this is now officially the worst name ever.
Yeah, so now the linter can't know that that's a hook, and so it can't help you with the rules of hooks. So if you put that behind an if, it's not going to know
Yeah, right.
that it's a,
If.
yeah. So yeah, we don't get an issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now go rename it to you, put it back to the use, and then we'll see a lint problem show up. You got to do it on 63 also.
Ooh, sorry. Not that good on my feet. No. React hook user in posts is named terribly and is called conditionally. React hooks must be called in the exact same order in every component render.
Yeah, so there are a handful of foot guns with hooks, but only if you don't have the linter. If you've got the linter, pretty much all of them go away, and the linter will just like say, hey, you forgot a dependency. Hey, you rendered this conditionally. So you don't, like you think about all the problems that we had with binding functions and this, right? You can't call set state of null. We couldn't have a linter that could like find those errors for us. So what we've done with hooks is we've traded the complexity of classes with the complexity of understanding how closures work in JavaScript. The difference is with classes we can't write tools to lead us the right direction. With closures we actually can. Now the linter can say, hey, you closed over this, but then you're using it later and you didn't pass in those dependencies, so pass in a dependency. So it's, to me, it's super exciting, especially for people new to React, is, React can help you write the code right and not shoot yourself in the foot.
One thing I wanted to say about the render props, have you ever used multiple render props? Right, they're like infamous for this, right? And then you go like, oh, but I also need the posts. Now I got the posts. Now.
Well, it looks like there's a hierarchy. It seems like, oh, do the posts depend on the user?
Yeah, now I'm finally ready to render something, right? I finally got all the data I need. Now I've got the user and the post. So the way they compose is in the JSX, which forces everything out right? So you end up with this kind of triangle. Whereas the way these things compose is just by calling functions in consecutive lines, right? Calling them consecutively instead of like nested.
Yeah.
Are there any potential performance gotchas around the extra time that presumably it takes to check the dependencies that you pass in before it renders?
No. Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, it's literally just an object equality comparison.
And if you're running your class correctly, you would already have that diff like Michael had in his code, right? He was already diffing the prop. And it's not really different than what React is doing.
This thing right here, like you would have, if you were doing your class correctly, like you would be doing that comparison already.
They use object.is, which is, it's lightning fast. If that'll never be your problem. The answer is always render less stuff if you've got a performance issue.
All right, well, we better wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming out, and we'll see you later.
Thanks again.